The Celestial Institute of Advanced Xenological Studies occupied a moon. Not just any moon, mind you, but one that had been specifically terraformed to accommodate exactly 47 different atmospheric requirements, gravity preferences, and electromagnetic tolerances. It was the kind of engineering achievement that made younger species weep with envy and older species nod approvingly while secretly checking the structural integrity reports. The Institute represented everything the Galactic Communion stood for: cooperation, understanding, and the shared pursuit of knowledge. Also, incredibly expensive tuition fees that kept the riffraff out. But nobody mentioned that part in the brochures. For 3,000 years, the Institute had produced the finest minds in known space, diplomats who could negotiate peace treaties in 17 languages simultaneously, scientists who unraveled the mysteries of dark matter while eating lunch, engineers who built impossible things and then built even more impossible things to maintain the first impossible things. It was, without question, the most prestigious educational establishment in 4 galaxies. And then the humans showed up and ruined everything. Well, not ruined exactly. That would be unfair. They just sort of walked in, with their bipedal swagger, and their distressing lack of natural body armor, and their bizarre insistence on consuming poison for recreational purposes, and suddenly everyone had to recalibrate what they thought they knew about evolution, survival, and the fundamental nature of sanity. The thing about the galactic community was that it had a very comfortable hierarchy. At the top sat the Archons, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form approximately 40,000 years ago, and now spent their time contemplating the nature of existence and occasionally filing patent disputes. Below them were the Crovenians, whose 4 brains and crystalline cognitive matrices made them the undisputed intellectuals of known space. Then came dozens of other species, each with their own niche, their own specialty, their own comfortable place in the grand scheme of things. Earth rated a 9.8 on the Deathworld Index. For context, anything above a 6 was considered barely habitable. A 7 meant your planet was actively trying to kill you on a daily basis. An 8 meant it was succeeding with alarming regularity. A 9 meant that evolution on your world was less of a process and more of an ongoing war crime. Earth had scored a 9.8 because the evaluators had felt that a perfect 10 would be hyperbolic, and they prided themselves on their scientific objectivity. They had clearly never experienced a Category 5 hurricane, but that was beside the point. The first human admitted to the Institute had caused a minor panic, not because she did anything threatening, but because she casually mentioned that her morning jog back home involved dodging venomous reptiles, and that she found the Institute's gravity refreshing. Even though it was set to 1.4 standard, the medical staff had needed sedation after reviewing her species' baseline radiation tolerance. That had been 3 years ago. The Communion had since admitted humans to various institutions, and everyone had developed a sort of nervous acceptance. Yes, they came from a nightmare world, where the weather could kill you, the animals could kill you, the plants could kill you, and even the microscopic organisms were in on the conspiracy. Yes, their idea of safe was everyone else's idea of imminent death. But they were also surprisingly good at not actually starting wars. They had interesting music, and their food was either delicious or lethal, which at least made faculty dinners more exciting. The second human admitted to the Institute arrived on a Tuesday, which was already suspicious because nothing good ever happened on a Tuesday. She walked into advanced xenological theory, wearing something called jeans and a shirt with a picture of a predatory earth mammal on it, carrying a beverage that was literally steaming despite the ambient temperature being perfectly comfortable for most species. Professor Kelzix, a Varaonian with excellent compound eyes and 13 doctorates, had looked at the roster, looked at the human, looked at the roster again, and made a small clicking sound that his species made when contemplating early retirement. The human sat down in the back row, smiled pleasantly at everyone who stared at her, and proceeded to drink her probably toxic beverage without dying. This was already more social grace than some species managed in their entire academic careers. Her name was listed in the roster as Mackenzie Reeves, though she'd told people to just call her Mac, which had caused some confusion among species that used full nomenclature strings, including generational markers and home colony designations. She had dark hair pulled back in something called a ponytail, which seemed structurally unsound but apparently worked fine on Earth. Her eyes were an unusual amber color that several students found unsettling because human eyes moved independently of their heads and could track you without any polite warning indicators. She also had visible scars on her arms, which was alarming because it meant she'd survived injuries serious enough to leave permanent marks. Most galactic species had medical technology that prevented scarring. Humans apparently viewed them as character building, which was the kind of Deathworld logic that made xenopsychologists drink. The classroom settled into an uneasy equilibrium. Humans were known quantities now, filed under terrifying but generally harmless, if unprovoked. Most students had adopted a policy of polite distance and trying not to think too hard about the fact that human leisure activities included something called rock climbing, which involved deliberately ascending vertical surfaces for fun. Vextheron noticed her immediately, which was his first mistake. Vextheron was Quilarian, a species that had evolved on a planet with low gravity and high mineral content. His people were crystalline beings, faceted and glittering, with cognitive processes that ran through silicon matrices instead of organic neurons. They were brilliant, logical, and absolutely insufferable about both qualities. Vextheron in particular had graduated top of his previous institution, had published 7 papers before even arriving at the institute, and had a confidence that could be seen from orbit without magnification. He was also 23 in human years, which meant he had approximately 5% of the life experience he thought he had and 100% of the arrogance to compensate. A human? He said to his study partner, a nervous flitteron named Zex, who vibrated at frequencies that indicated extreme discomfort. How progressive of the admissions board. The sarcasm dripped off every syllable like condensation off a cold surface. Several nearby students suddenly found their data pads fascinating. Vex, perhaps we should focus on the lecture, Zex suggested. His carapace shifting through colors that meant, please don't do anything stupid. I'm simply observing that the Institute's standards have become remarkably flexible, Vextheron continued, his crystalline voice carrying across the lecture hall with unfortunate clarity. I suppose they need to meet diversity quotas, even if it means admitting species that only recently discovered faster than light travel. Mac looked up from her datapad. Her expression was pleasant, almost friendly. We discovered it 30 years ago, actually. But who's counting? Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of calm that made Professor Kelzix's antennae flatten against his head in warning. 30 years. Vextheron repeated, his facets catching the light as he turned to face her fully. My people had mapped 3 galaxies before your species invented the wheel. But please, do educate me on your remarkable achievements. The classroom had gone very quiet. Even the Flitterans, who communicated partially through subsonic vibrations, had stopped humming. Mac took another sip of her toxic beverage. Well, we invented the wheel at least 5 times independently across different continents. Then, we used it to build war chariots, which we used to run each other over for a few thousand years. Good times. Someone made a choking sound. It might have been laughter. It might have been horror. Fascinating, Vextheron said, in a tone that meant the opposite. And now you're here to learn from species that moved past such barbarism millennia ago. Actually, we still have war chariots, Mac said thoughtfully. We call them tanks now. They're faster and have better armor. Also, bigger guns. Professor Kelzix cleared his throat, which sounded like gravel in a garbage disposal. Perhaps we should return to today's lesson on comparative survival strategies across. I have a proposal. Vextheron interrupted, because of course he did. He stood, his crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that his species used to indicate confidence. Since our human classmate seems so confident in her species' capabilities, perhaps she'd be interested in a small academic challenge. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Despite the climate control being objectively perfect, Mac tilted her head. What kind of challenge? A comprehensive assessment. academic knowledge, physical capability, strategic thinking. We'll compare our species' respective strengths across multiple domains. Unless, of course, you're concerned about embarrassment." He smiled. Quillarians didn't have mouths in the traditional sense, but they could arrange their facets to imply one. It was not a nice smile. Zex was vibrating so fast, he was nearly invisible. Other students had started edging toward the exits. Professor Kelzix was typing something into his datapad with all four of his manipulator arms, probably a message to the administrative office that read "Incident incoming. Please send help and possibly medical staff." Mac was quiet for a moment, then she set down her beverage and smiled back. It was the kind of smile that made every predator species student in the room sit up straighter. It was the kind of smile that made every prey species student seriously consider whether they'd left anything important in the classroom that couldn't be replaced. It was the kind of smile that, if you'd shown it to a xenobiologist, would have made them write a paper titled, "Oh no, a retrospective study." "Sure," she said. "Sounds fun." The betting pool started before the lecture even ended. By dinner, it had spread to 3 different dormitories and included speculation on whether the medical center had adequate facilities for treating catastrophic crystalline fractures. The odds heavily favored Vexeron, because he was brilliant and accomplished, and came from a species known for intellectual superiority. The odds also failed to account for the fact that humans defined fun as things that would traumatize most species into catatonia. The challenge was scheduled for the following week in the Institute's Comprehensive Assessment Facility, which was basically a holographic simulation chamber that could replicate any environment, scenario, or disaster you could imagine, plus several you couldn't. It was used for advanced training scenarios and occasionally for settling disputes between students, because the Galactic Communion believed in channeling aggression into productive outlets. They'd clearly never met humans before establishing that policy. News of the challenge spread through the Institute like a particularly motivated virus. Students who normally focused on their studies were suddenly discussing betting strategies. Professors who normally maintained professional distance were suddenly very interested in clearing their schedules for that afternoon. Even the Archons, who normally existed on a plane of pure contemplation, had reportedly tuned into the Institute's network to observe. Vextheron spent the week preparing with characteristic intensity. He reviewed academic materials, ran physical conditioning routines optimized for his crystalline structure, and studied every available record of human capabilities with the kind of focus usually reserved for doctoral dissertations. Mac went to her classes, did her homework, and was spotted one evening in the recreational facility teaching a group of Flitterans how to play something called poker, which appeared to involve cards, bluffing, and psychological warfare. She won 17 credits and 3 different species snack rations, then gave them all back because you guys are too nice to hustle. The Flitterans weren't sure whether to be relieved or insulted. The day of the challenge arrived with a kind of anticipation usually reserved for major sporting events or diplomatic incidents. The assessment facility's observation deck was packed with students, faculty, and several species who'd heard about the event through interstellar communication channels and had traveled specifically to watch. Professor Kelzix served as primary adjudicator, flanked by 2 other faculty members who specialized in xenological assessment. They all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "The challenge will consist of 4 phases," Kelzix announced, his voice projected through translation devices for the dozens of species present. "Academic problem solving, physical endurance, strategic simulation, and adaptive survival. Each phase will be scored independently. Standard safety protocols are in effect." What he didn't mention was that the safety protocols had been updated specifically for this challenge and now included contingencies for human doing something inexplicable, human befriending something dangerous, and human making weapon from random objects. The safety committee had worked overtime on that last one. Vextheron entered the facility first, his crystalline form glittering under the lights. He looked confident, prepared, ready to defend his species' intellectual superiority. Mac entered wearing athletic clothing and carrying a water bottle. She looked like she was about to attend a casual gym session. Phase 1, Kelzix announced. Advanced Quantum Mechanics Problem Solving. You will each receive an identical theoretical problem requiring multi-dimensional mathematics and applied theoretical physics. You have 30 minutes. Begin. The holographic displays flickered to life, showing a problem that would make most graduate students weep. Something about quantum entanglement in non-Euclidean space with variable dimensional constants and temporal fluctuation factors. It was the kind of problem that required not just intelligence, but creativity, intuition, and possibly divine inspiration. Vextharon approached it methodically, his silicon-based cognition processing the mathematics at impressive speed. His facets flickered as he worked through dimensional matrices, his solutions appearing in the holographic display in neat, logical progressions. Max stared at the problem for about 30 seconds, her head tilted. Then she started scribbling on the holographic interface with her fingers, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her approach was chaos. Where Vextharon had elegant mathematical progressions, Mac had diagrams, shorthand notations, and what appeared to be a small drawing of a cat in one corner with "why though" written next to it. Her solution pathway looked like someone had tried to solve theoretical physics while riding a roller coaster. It was also completely correct. The adjudicators stared at their displays. Kelzix made his clicking sound again, louder this time. Both solutions are valid, he announced slowly. Candidate Vextharon used traditional quantum mechanics frameworks with exceptional precision. Candidate Reeves used what appears to be a combination of theoretical approaches, including some I don't recognize, and what might be an Earth cartoon reference. Both arrived at correct answers. This phase is scored as a tie. The crowd murmured. Several students checked their betting slips nervously. Vextharon's facets dimmed slightly, which was the crystalline equivalent of a frown. A tie is acceptable for the first phase. Cool, Max said, drinking from her water bottle. What's next? Phase 2. Physical Endurance Assessment. The facility's holographic systems reconfigured, creating an obstacle course that would make a military training ground look gentle. Variable gravity fields, climbing structures, pressure differentials, temperature extremes, and obstacles designed to challenge multiple body types across various species. You will complete the course as quickly as possible while maintaining safety protocols, Kelzix explained. Candidate Vextharon, you may begin. The Quillarian approached the course with calculated precision. His crystalline structure was not built for physical prowess, but his people had developed techniques for efficient movement. He navigated obstacles carefully, using momentum and geometry to compensate for his lower physical strength. His form was textbook perfect, his efficiency admirable. He completed the course in 18 minutes and 43 seconds, which was excellent for his species. Candidate Reeves, you may begin. Max stretched, touching her toes in a way that made several invertebrate species uncomfortable, because vertebrae weren't supposed to bend like that. Then she looked at the course, looked at the safety protocols display, and said something that would echo through Institute legend forever. Can I ignore the recommended pathway? Kelzix's antennae did something complicated. The pathway is designed for optimal safety, and yeah, but can I ignore it? There was a long pause. The adjudicators conferred. Several looked like they were reconsidering their career choices. Safety protocols must be maintained, but creative problem solving is permitted within those parameters. Sweet. What happened next would require multiple incident reports, a review of safety protocols, and several strongly worded memos from the administrative office. Mac didn't so much complete the obstacle course as she declared war on it. Where there were climbing structures, she jumped, her Deathworld-bred muscles launching her impossible distances. Where there were careful pathways through variable gravity fields, she tucked and rolled like gravity was more of a suggestion than a law. At one point she swung from a structure using only her arms, which made several species physically ill because who had upper body strength like that? She also provided running commentary. Oh, this is like the rope climb in gym class, except without Coach Martinez yelling at you. A flip through a low-gravity section. This part's actually pretty fun. We should add more spinning. A casual leap across a gap that required precise timing. Back home we call this parkour. Sometimes we add burning buildings for extra challenge. She completed the course in 9 minutes and 12 seconds, which was impossible except she'd literally just done it. She wasn't even breathing that hard. The observation deck was silent, except for the sound of several species' breathing apparatuses working overtime. That was nice, Mac said, drinking more water. Good warm-up. Warm up. Vex Theron's facets had dimmed significantly. His silicon-based cognition was processing what he'd just witnessed and filing it under impossible but observed, therefore must recalibrate fundamental assumptions. Phase 2 goes to candidate Reeves, Kelzix announced, his voice slightly hollow. Phase 3 will begin after a brief recess for recalibration. The recess was less for equipment recalibration, and more so the medical staff could prepare for Phase 4. Also so several species could update their psychological profiles for humans from concerning to absolutely terrifying. Phase 3 was strategic simulation. The facility generated a complex military scenario involving multiple factions, limited resources, and victory conditions that required both tactical thinking and long-term strategy. It was based on historical conflicts from various species, designed to test strategic creativity and command capability. Both candidates were given identical starting positions, identical resources, and identical objectives. The simulation would run at accelerated time, with their commands being executed by sophisticated AI forces. You may begin strategizing, Kelzix announced. Vex Theron approached it like the intellectual challenge it was. He analyzed force distributions, calculated resource allocation, planned strategic movements based on classical military theory from 17 different species. His strategy was elegant, efficient, and followed established doctrine from thousands of years of galactic warfare. Mac pulled up something from the simulation's database labeled Earth Historical Conflicts and started taking notes. Her strategy was terrifying. Where Vex Theron had clean battle lines, Mac had guerrilla warfare. Where he had resource optimization, she had something called Scorched Earth Policy. Where he had by-the-book fleet movements, she had tactics with names like Trojan Horse and Crazy Ivan, and something simply labeled Pickett's Charge, with a note that said, "Do not actually do this, but they won't expect it." The simulation ran. Vex Theron's forces moved with precision and grace. Mac's forces moved like they'd collectively decided that the Geneva Conventions were more of a suggestion. The adjudicators watched in growing horror as Mac's simulated forces employed tactics that violated 17 different galactic warfare conventions, 3 laws of civilized combat, and possibly several ethical principles that hadn't even been formalized yet. She's weaponizing crop failures, one adjudicator whispered. She's using psychological warfare through propaganda, another added. She's teaching the simulation's AI to use sarcasm as a negotiating tactic, Kelzix said, all 4 arms gripping his datapad. How is that even possible? The simulation ended with Mac's forces achieving complete victory through a combination of conventional tactics, unconventional warfare, and what appeared to be several war crimes that her simulated enemies couldn't prosecute because they'd surrendered unconditionally. Vex Theron's strategy had been brilliant. Mac's strategy had been effective. There was a significant difference. Phase 3 goes to candidate Reeves, Kelzix announced. Though I will be filing a formal request to review what human military history is being included in our database. It's all public record, Mac said cheerfully. Though you might want to skip the chapter on chemical warfare. That stuff gets dark. Several species made sounds of distress. Phase 4. Kelzix continued, sounding like he aged several decades. Adaptive survival scenario. You will be placed in a simulated hostile environment with limited resources. The objective is survival for 1 simulated week. You will be scored on resource management, threat assessment, and adaptive problem solving. The facility reconfigured into something that looked like a nightmare had a baby with a disaster film. Hostile terrain, dangerous weather patterns, limited food and water, and simulated predators that would make most species immediately request extraction. Candidate Vex Theron, you may begin. The Quillarian approached it with admirable determination. He found shelter, rationed his resources carefully, avoided predators through stealth and careful planning. His silicon-based physiology gave him some advantages in resource efficiency. He survived the simulated week with 73% of his starting resources intact and 0 encounters with major threats. It was a textbook perfect survival scenario. He'd done everything right. Candidate Reeves, you may begin. Mac looked at the hostile environment, looked at the limited resources, and started laughing. Sorry, she said, wiping her eyes. It's just, this is less dangerous than camping in Australia. Or Canada. Or actually most of Earth. She entered the simulation. What happened over the next simulated week would be analyzed by xenobiologists for years. Mac didn't just survive the hostile environment, she thrived in it. Within the first simulated day, she'd built a shelter that was better than the simulation's pre-made options, started a fire using 2 rocks and determination, and had somehow befriended one of the simulated predators by sharing her food rations. That predator is designed to be threatening, one adjudicator said. She's scratching behind its ears, another responded. Do those creatures even have ears? They do now apparently. By day 3, Mac had established a base camp, created tools from environmental resources, and had mapped the local area while providing a running commentary about how this was actually pretty relaxing compared to finals week. By day 5, she'd domesticated 3 more predators, had a sustainable food source through fishing and foraging, and was sitting by her fire teaching the predators to play fetch. This is not how survival scenarios are supposed to work, Kelzik said. She's turned a hostile environment into a vacation, another faculty member added. She's singing, someone observed. Why is she singing? Mac was indeed singing something called Country Roads while roasting what appeared to be a simulated fish on a stick. The predators were sitting around her fire like very large, very dangerous puppies. The simulation ended with Mac having consumed only 30% of her starting resources, having created additional tools and shelters, and having established what could generously be called a functioning ecosystem and what could accurately be called a Deathworlder's paradise. She exited the simulation still humming her song, looking refreshed. That was actually really nice, she said. We should do outdoor activities more often. Build team cohesion and stuff. The observation deck was completely silent. Several species were re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about survival, resource management, and the fundamental nature of threat assessment. Vexaran's facets had gone completely dim. His silicon cognition was processing the fact that he'd just watched someone turn a survival scenario into a camping trip and somehow make it look easy. Phase 4 goes to Candidate Reeves, Kelzik announced. The overall challenge victor is Candidate Reeves. The assessment is concluded. There should have been cheering or celebration, or at least acknowledgement. Instead, there was just stunned silence, and the sound of several students recalculating their entire academic careers. Vex Theron stood in the center of the facility, his crystalline structure flickering with emotions that didn't translate well but probably involved existential crisis, and maybe some questioning of fundamental beliefs. Mac walked over to him, still carrying her water bottle. Hey, good effort, she said, and she sounded genuinely sincere. That quantum mechanics solution was really elegant. Way better than my messy approach. Vex Theron's voice came out fractured, his usual confidence completely shattered. I don't understand. We are Quilarian. We are intellectually superior. We have evolved beyond physical limitations. We have studied warfare theory for millennia. How did you? Different evolutionary pressures, Mac said with a shrug. Your planet sounds really nice, actually. Low gravity, high minerals, peaceful development. That's great. Earth was just really good at trying to kill us, so we got good at not dying. Different skill sets, you know? You befriended the predators, Vexaran said, like he was still trying to process it. They were just big puppies once you got to know them. Plus, I had food. Food makes everyone friendlier. You turned a hostile environment into a recreational facility. I mean, it wasn't that hostile. Nobody was shooting at me, there weren't any hurricanes, and the predators were honestly pretty chill once they realized I wasn't prey. Back home, We pay money to go camping in worse conditions. Vex Theron made a sound like glass breaking. It might have been laughter. It might have been a mental breakdown, possibly both. Your species is insane, he finally said. Yeah, we get that a lot, Mac agreed. But hey, makes life interesting, right? Professor Kelzix approached them, all four arms holding various data pads and what appeared to be medication for stress-related conditions. That was educational, he said carefully. Candidate Vexatheron, your performance was exemplary by any reasonable standard. You demonstrated excellent academic knowledge, physical capability within your species parameters, strategic thinking, and survival skills. You should be proud. I was utterly defeated, Vextheron said. Yes, but you were utterly defeated by a human, which is becoming a fairly common experience across multiple domains. The Galactic Communion has started offering support groups. I don't need a support group, I need to understand how Candidate Reeves, Kelzix interrupted, turning to Mac. Your performance was remarkable, also concerning. Also, we're going to need to review several safety protocols. Also, please never do that thing with the variable gravity field again, because I'm fairly sure it violated 3 laws of physics. Sorry, Mac said, not sounding very sorry. Got carried away. We're also going to need to discuss your strategic simulation tactics with the ethics committee. They were all historically accurate strategies, Mac protested. That's what concerns us. The observation deck was starting to empty, students filing out in a daze, many of them clutching their data pads, and probably planning to completely restructure their academic focuses. Several species were having intense discussions about revising their xenological assessment criteria. The betting pool had resulted in complete chaos, with most people having lost significant credits, except for one flitteron named Zex, who had apparently bet everything on Mac, and was now rich enough to fund his own research station. Over the next few weeks, the challenge became legend. Stories spread through the Institute, then through academic networks, then through the broader Galactic Communion. Humans became simultaneously more respected and more feared, which was apparently their natural state. Vextheron, to his credit, didn't disappear in shame. Instead, he approached Mac after a lecture 3 days later. I want to understand, he said, his facets arranged in what might have been humility. How does your species think? How do you approach problems? How do you survive conditions that would kill most galactic species? Mac considered this. Honestly, we just kind of make it up as we go. Earth didn't give us time to be perfect, so we got good at being adaptable. Also, we're really stubborn, like, really stubborn. Our species motto might as well be, hold my beer and watch this. What's beer? Poison we drink for fun. Vextheron made his glass-breaking sound again. Of course it is. They became unlikely study partners after that. Vextheron learned that humans approached problems with creative chaos that somehow worked. Mac learned that Quillarians had perspectives on theoretical physics that were genuinely brilliant once you got past the arrogance. They even co-authored a paper on comparative problem-solving methodologies across species, with different evolutionary backgrounds. The Institute updated its curriculum to include more diverse perspectives on survival, strategy, and academic approaches. They also added warnings to several courses that human methodology may differ significantly from recommended approaches, and please do not attempt human-style solutions without proper supervision and safety equipment. Professor Kelzix developed a stress-related condition that required medication, but he also published a groundbreaking paper on Deathworld species adaptive capabilities that won several prestigious awards. The Galactic Communion quietly updated its assessment criteria for species classification, adding a new category called Evolutionary Pressure Index that measured not just a planet's danger level, but how that danger shaped cognitive development and problem-solving approaches. Earth's score went up. Everyone else's terror went up proportionally. Mac continued her studies, maintained decent grades, taught half the Institute how to play poker, and occasionally provided demonstrations of human capabilities that resulted in updated safety protocols and several more support groups. She also started a recreational camping club, which 3 brave students joined. They went on one camping trip to a mild environment and came back looking haunted, but strangely invigorated. The club's membership doubled the next week. Vextheron, when asked about his famous challenge and subsequent defeat, would sometimes reflect on how his people's long period of peaceful evolution had given them brilliance but also complacency. Humans, forced to evolve in constant crisis, had developed something his species lacked: the ability to adapt to absolutely anything through pure stubborn determination and creative problem-solving. "They're not better than us," he would say. "They're just different. Their planet tried to kill them every single day, so they learned to kill it back, or befriend it, or somehow both, simultaneously. It's horrifying and admirable in equal measure." The Institute continued producing the finest minds in known space. But now those minds included humans, with all their Deathworld logic, adaptive chaos, and disturbing tendency to turn survival scenarios into recreational activities. The Galactic Communion learned to live with this. They didn't have much choice, really. Once you'd seen a human befriend a hostile predator, domesticate a dangerous environment, and solve quantum mechanics problems while making cat drawings, you had to accept that the universe was just going to be strange from now on. And somewhere on Earth, in the evolutionary crucible that had produced beings like Mackenzie Reeves, life continued its chaotic, dangerous, beautiful dance. Hurricanes still struck coastlines, predators still hunted prey, plate tectonics still reshaped continents. And humans still looked at all of it and said, "Hold my beer, I've got this." The galaxy had been a comfortable, predictable place for thousands of years. Then the humans arrived and reminded everyone that comfortable and predictable were luxuries, not guarantees. Evolution didn't care about your feelings, physics didn't respect your safety protocols, and survival was less about being perfect and more about being too stubborn to quit. The Celestial Institute of Advanced Xenological Studies continued educating students from across known space. But now they did it with the understanding that intelligence came in many forms, evolution followed many paths, and sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem was to approach it with the kind of creative chaos that only a Deathworld species could provide. Also, they installed better safety protocols, significantly better safety protocols, because humans were helpful, friendly, brilliant, and absolutely terrifying when they decided something was going to be fun. The moral of the story, if there was one, was simple. Never challenge someone from Appliance or Deathworld unless you're prepared to completely reevaluate your understanding of possible. And definitely don't do it if they show up drinking something that's literally steaming and calling it a casual beverage. The humans were here, they were staying, and the galaxy was just going to have to adapt. Ironic, really, considering adaptation was humanity's specialty all along.